is Paul. Yes. This narrow construction, a strict interpretation of a law, statute, or document. Yes. As opposed to a liberal, comprehensive interpretation, a literal construction. Yes. Some judges adhere to a narrow construction of the meaning of certain passages in the U.S. Constitution, while others may give a broad, non-technical interpretation of the same passages. Oh. And then there's the NASDAQ, an abbreviation for the National Association of Security Dealers, automated quotations, functions as a stock exchange for securities not sold on a regulated exchange, which are called over-the-counter securities. Pooch. Then there's that NAFTA, abbreviation for the North American Free Trade Agreement. Yes, Free Trade Compact between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Pooch. Now, this narrow construction, yes, I have mentioned that the requirements of the RCWs, where I get 5 judicial days notice before having court hearings, yes, didn't happen in 2011. I wasn't here. So I was on Guam. And then when you arrested me, is it a narrow construction to have to read Miranda rights? And then there's this whole concept of me not being able to contact domestic violence advocacy, the charity about healthy families. And, well, did you get the documentation from Guam? Now, I've had a difficult time explaining the requirements of the laws, both the court rules, yes, and then not changing my address so that a pastor that kicked me out in the middle of the winter, yes, continued to get all of my mail for the last 5 years. The same individual that used an image of my sister holding Legina Pooch, that happened to be the same individual that was named as the father of an adopted daughter of Legina, yes, in the Squim Gazette, and they published it on the wrong day because they just didn't want to go through and correct all the articles. Yes. Now, I think there is some actual statutes or documents that make it a literal interpretation, yes, that whenever, well, there's a freedom of the press and then there's a fraudulent of the press, yes. Now, why don't you just look at those civil rights again? Are you sure? You can't. Now, the NASDAQ, why don't you get me all the stock, both private ownership, Sound Publishing, yes, your shareholders, ouch! And then give me all the publicly listed stock of every magazine, media, and newspaper company, Hearst, ouch, New York Times, Chicago Tribune. You know, I emailed the Los Angeles Times about my civil rights being violated. I talked about the chief of police of Los Angeles Police Department yesterday. And I've communicated with those in publishing about this corruption of not requiring the actual signature of the petitioner. Yes. Using forgeries of those elected to office. Yes. And holding my sons kidnapped and abducted since July 2nd of 2011, and they felt no compulsion to write the article. Now, I'm sitting here on the street in almost freezing weather because nobody seems to understand these laws. But I'm kind of thinking that this Constitution that you do not support and you do not defend, pooch, I'm thinking you're liable. Ooh. Now, I know you issued stock in a publishing company known as Sound Publishing, and then you decided to upgrade your website software without actually putting the actual date of all the published articles. Yes. And you thought, well, we just don't have the money or time to do this. Pooh. But I would think it affects the stockholders of any privately held media company or any publicly held media company. Yes. And for some reason you thought, well, we don't have to publish an article about violating the civil rights of American citizens, and we can allow for the police department to continue to arrest an individual when they had the evidence that I wasn't there and I hadn't committed any crime. Now, these agreements, yes, known as NAFTA, I read the headlines this morning. The market went up because of some sort of deal between Canada and Mexico. You know, I would think that the agreements that the United States signs, yes, let's say I had informed Canada, I had actually emailed their elected legislators in Canada, yes, a couple of years ago. In fact, I sent a contact form to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I asked them, well, do you have due process in Canada? Because we don't have due process in the United States of America. And then there's Mexico. Oh my gosh. Well, I emailed the Supreme Court of Canada thinking they would speak to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. It could invalidate any and all agreements of the United States of America. Now, I'm going to look at the agreements, okay? Because this narrow construction of what the Constitution of this great nation says. I had told you that when I contacted the RCMP, and Canada wouldn't do anything. Mexico wouldn't do anything. And it seemed like nobody in the United States really believes that you have to actually enforce the Constitution of... Now, when I go to suing for the removal of every agreement of the United States, I fucking believe this.